today's keynote with Hoshi Rhonda Magee. And please take a moment to arrive and settle in. We are getting the live stream going, and so it will be a moment before we begin. So welcome all of you. So it is my honor to welcome all of you back to the Women of Wisdom Summit. And this is the final keynote, and we hope that you are feeling so nourished and deeply inspired by the depth and breadth and diversity of all of our speakers who have been offering wonderful teachings and practices, addressing challenges and joys of empowered modern women. And while we know that the Women of Wisdom Summit is primarily geared towards those who identify as women, of course, all are welcome to participate. And the learning modules that we have included themes such as the wisdom of your body, practices for healing and wholeness, remarkable women, past and present, finding inspiration in our ancestors, the divine feminine, how to recognize our own capacity to awaken, daily life as practice, and women in community awakening together. And we invite you to take advantage of this wonderful free event and explore all that it has to offer. The summit is available to watch for free through today, March 25th, and you are also invited to purchase the summit resource package for unlimited access to all the sessions. And Lions Roar is offering a special rate during this period, and the purchases do help support Lions Roar's nonprofit mission to share the Dharma, including producing free summits such as this one. So please see the event website for details, and also note the link that is pinned in the chat at the bottom of your screen. So this live session today is being recorded and will be made available to replay on the event website. And if you would like to ask a question of our speaker today, feel free to put that in the Q&A box below, and we will choose a few questions to bring to the keynote speaker towards the end of our hour today. And now I would like to offer an introduction to Hoshi Rhonda Magee. So Hoshi Rhonda Magee is a professor of law and director of the Center for Contemplative Law and Ethics at the University of San Francisco. Hoshi Magee has spent more than 20 years integrating mindfulness into higher education, leadership, and social engagement. A fellow of the Mind and Life Institute, she is an international keynote speaker and mindfulness teacher. And Hoshi Magee recently received an appointment to the National Institutes of Health's National Advisory Council for Complementary and Integrative Health. So welcome, Hoshi Magee. Wonderful to see you, and welcome.
Thank you so very much. It is an honor, really, to be with you all today. And I thank you so much, my dear Sharon, for that very gracious welcome. Well, beautiful beings, here we are. I have the really pleasure and honor and joy of just supporting us in gathering together in this final keynote session for this wonderful summit on women of wisdom. And we welcome absolutely everyone who has gathered here, women in all of our various manifestations and expressions, all the expressions of the feminine spirit in us, whatever our, kind of, at least from my perspective, whatever our sort of more or less conventional ways of identifying in terms of gender, I think of this as an invitation for us to draw close to the inspiration of the threads of the feminine that really enter our sort of exists, at least in my humble estimation, as an experience of what it means to be human. So however we move through the world, you are fully welcome here. We really 100% welcome everyone who, in the spirit of my voice, in the spirit of this summit, feels called to the practice and learning themes. And the themes for today, the title that I've selected for my remarks here, gets us thinking about what it means to feel the support of our authentic power, and to act in the world from the place of the power that we are, the energy that we are, the ashe, as we would say in the Yoruba tradition, this sort of life force, that power is what I'm pointing to when inviting a reflection on what it means for us to take our seats as leaders, and to access clarity, courage, and compassion as a support for the efforts we make in the direction of leading from wherever we happen to be. And so I will just share a few reflections here at the outset and invite a period of meditation together here before turning toward a Q&A set of reflections. So we've got about 50 minutes left together, and it'll be organized in that way, with these reflections, with a meditation interspersed in there, and then Q&A before we'll close. So to move us then into the remarks that I've prepared, just to kind of, by way of a bit of an overview, just to say the kinds of themes that I want to touch on today are themes that really, for me, really put a certain kind of energy in my commitments to living from the place of my commitments to take refuge in the Buddha, the teachings of the Buddha, the sort of embodiment of wisdom that the Buddha, as a figure, historical / somewhat mythical, represents, right? So taking refuge in the inspiration of one who has awakened, one who has committed themselves to really engaging in the personal commitments, in the way of walking in these embodiments that manifests a certain deep aspiration for liberation that touches and concerns all aspects and manifestations of this life force that we're privileged to kind of be present to as we move through the world. So taking refuge in the Buddha, taking refuge in the Dharma, in the teachings that many of us have been privileged to receive and are in the process of maybe a lifelong inquiry and having taken up that call to explore the teachings as a support for these times, these teachings we call the Dharma, the sort of spiritual law, if you will, that guides us, that supports us in waking up, and that provides a kind of common nutriment, if you will, food for spiritual growth, thought, reflection, inspiration. And then taking refuge in the Sangha. Sangha, of course, interpreted in variety, in all of its variations, the particular groups and places and settings where we may be gathering in real time to deepen our exploration of the way of the Dharma in our own lives. And so those sanghas mean so much to each of us, the particular ones that we experience in our lives. But I also want to just open up the way we're thinking about sangha to recognize the Mahasangha of all of us, the great sangha of all of us who, wherever we happen to find ourselves, are in this beautiful community of teaching, learning, and practice, and in ways, pardon me, seen and not seen, are supporting each other. I'm going to take a bit of water here. And by the way, I happen to have had the experience in my own life of whenever I'm speaking about things that really matter, my voice will often begin to do that. So bear with me, dear beings, if you hear my voice kind of manifest what, for me at least, seems like an indication that that this body is seeking to call forth and to find the words to point towards something that is quite important, feels quite important. And so along those lines, to point toward and to create a space here, I often, whenever I offer teachings or reflections, invite the metaphors of a lake or a campfire, recognizing that humankind for generations, for millennia, have gathered together around important matters and leaned in, right? Shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee. And so while we are gathering electronically here in this particular format, really just inviting that sort of imaginary, right? The invitation to imagine ourselves, despite the fact that we happen to be joining from our separate and maybe far-flung particular locations on the earth, but just to imagine ourselves as gathering here around this campfire. You're not alone wherever you happen to be. And to feel ourselves really landing here together, and to invite the guidance of our teachers, of our lineages, as we reflect on the themes here presented. And those themes, again, looking at how it is that we might access the leader within, and from the place of that sort of more intimate, mindful remembering of who we really are, and reconnection with that energy, really ascertaining the power of the practices, the power of our commitments to enhance clarity of view and perspective as one part of what we'll be talking about. And then to be thinking about what it is that supports us in strengthening our courage for meeting the challenges of our time, for meeting all which sort of may disrupt courageous action in the world. What does it look like for us to meet obstacles along the way and to nevertheless navigate them with courage? And how do our practices and our commitments support us in that? And then finally, really, how is it that we lean explicitly into compassion to support us in all of these things? And you all know, those of us who in some way or another encountered my work in the world, you may have heard me speak about, you may have seen me write a bit about in my book, The Inner Work of Racial Justice, some of the ways that my own grandmother is an inspiration to me as well. So I want to invite, especially as we're gathering together as women and or inspired by the feminine in our lives and lineages, I would just want to invite us to call forth the teachers who support us in formal and informal ways, who embody that feminine wisdom. And for me, for sure, that means naming Nanny Suggs, who was my grandmother, who was born in 1906, toward the beginning of the last century and passed away toward the end of it. So really lived her entire life over the course of the 20th century, including all of its many changes and obstacles, insofar as what a cisgender, female-bodied, racialized Black, right, from the American South, what a woman like my grandmother had to navigate. And I'll just I want to bring all that into the room. There's way much more than I can actually literally describe in the way of a bio for my grandmother. But I'm just pointing to her life and the way that her inspiration is part of my story, part of what I lean into as I reflect on these themes of cultivating the leader within for these times. And as I do so, as I point to my own grandmother, I'm inviting us to pause and to remember those manifestations of feminine wisdom in our own background that are right here with us, that are tapping us on the shoulder as we lean into the questions and themes of this talk. Just to say a little bit more about this, I was born myself in North Carolina, in a small town called Kinston, where in 1967, I don't mind naming that date, the last year of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life on the earth, where my grandmother, Nanny, was an important figure in my life. My parents at the time were going through divorce. And so I spent a lot of nights and early mornings with my grandmother, taking care of me and my siblings. And she would be doing this while also taking care of her household there, my uncles and others her own kids who were older adult kids who were still living in and out of the house. And she was working outside the home, actually cleaning as a housekeeper, the house of one family, right? Leaving every day to spend all day at this one family's home. The family was a white racialized family whose names happened, somewhat ironically to be the Outlaws. But my grandmother, Nanny, embodied for me a way of moving through the world, notwithstanding all of the barriers to her own, let's say, manifestation of freedom in conventional terms, right? In terms of how we as a society tend to look for indicia of freedom. We look for wealth, we look for formal titles. In terms of how we look for indicia of leadership, we look for formal occupational statuses or positions in structures of some authority. And so when we think about, when I think about cultivations of the qualities that will support us in leading, I do think of, and I want us all to be thinking about the manifestations of these qualities that we have seen in the world, that we saw in prior generations, and that we seek to embody and make real as a guide for our own behavior and action, and in view of the fact that the generations to come in some ways may be, looking for clues, seeds, that which might help guide them as they move through the world as well. And so certainly, as a little girl watching my grandmother Nan, what I saw her do was get up every day before dawn and commit to a set of practices that for her enhanced these three dimensions of leadership and of engaged wisdom that I'm pointing toward here: clarity, courage, and compassion. To speak a little bit more about the clarity dimension, all of us who practice in some way or who are inspired by the teachings of the Buddha are aware that the Buddha offered this very elegant fourfold prescription for waking ourselves up and moving through the world in a way that would incline us toward knowing what causes us suffering and liberating ourselves from it. That would incline us toward enacting liberation moment to moment, day to day, within and for ourselves, but not only for ourselves, right? So that inner and outer set of practices as a core support for a kind of waking up that would dissolve the kind of the sort of false notion of this sort of absolute separation, isolation in these bodies that conventionally we often are deluded into sort of believing is the whole truth. And so in these reflections, I'm going to be speaking, of course, about my experience from my own embodiment. I'll talk about my grandmother, but as I use these words, please know that the view that the Buddha invited us into engagement with, where we recognize that there is suffering, dukkha, that is caused by our confused habits around attachment, aversion, and just sort of ignorance to reality. Those causes of suffering that the teachings of the Four Noble Truths help sort of make clearer to us. I just want to say that as a foundation for my reflections, I am, sort of rooted in that first sort of eye-opening teaching presented by the Buddha. So yes, there's suffering there, and dukkha, this sort of way in which we find ourselves caught and stuck in our own particular. We all have our unique way of really finding ourselves suffering due to our attachments, our aversions, our confusion. And then, of course, the good news that there is a way of relieving our suffering, right? There's a way of alleviating our suffering, and that way being the Eightfold Path. That Eightfold Path, of course, having as its sort of first path factor, right view. And so when I think about the clarity invitation of these practices, I'm certainly thinking about the clarifying teachings presented in that elegant Four Noble Truth and teaching as it avails itself, as it avails to all of us, a set of ways of thinking about and then exploring for ourselves how to move through the world that can, wake us up when we're getting stuck. So for me, that first theme element that I want to that I'm just simply pointing to in the short time that we have here, that these practices can help clarify us. For me, is an invitation to reflect on the ways that I make personal commitments to practice and to moving through the world in ways that make manifest those commitments. And so, and then, that speaks to my own life as a law professor, a teacher, an advocate for social justice in this body at this time. And there are all kinds of challenges that I encounter, seeking to make the most of the opportunities that I have been given in this life, as the granddaughter of Nanny, including that opportunity as a little girl to wake up watching her discern a way of wisdom and clarity that was right for her. She wasn't a student of Buddhism. For her, it was a kind of Christianity that had a lot in common with the sort of prophetic, uh, liberatory practices and inspirations of, the historical figure known as Jesus the Christ, and in particular, the commitment to love and action that she saw as Christ's way. My grandmother would get up before dawn and before she had to on every day and engage in regular practices. For her, they were centering prayer. They included, a deep devotional reconnection to a reverence for life itself and for the power that she would have in even her humble, what we from conventional lenses would not see as any kind of a position of formal authority, right? As a housekeeper, cleaning the house, going to the home of the outlaws every day from, you know, practically dawn to dusk, in a way that we all know now that any of us have our own homes, you don't actually need somebody to be there all of that time to clean the house unless you are almost enacting the legacies of not just segregation, but a kind of caste-like hierarchy right up into the middle of the 20th century. So my grandmother was seeing the reality of oppression and meeting that every day, and nevertheless finding a way at the dawn of each day, before dawn of each day, to center in her own power. So clarifying practices are something that I think women who have come through the world that was not created for our maximal thriving and flourishing, female-bodied women, and those who in ways that are gender fluid and that queer, that defy conventional labeling, all of us who access the feminine as we move through the world, and whatever our identifications, we know that the world has often met us with the legacies and demands and imperatives of patriarchy. So we have had to bear up against the threats that come with those structures of oppression. And those threats are myriad, they're obvious and not obvious. So it certainly, if we look throughout our history, we will see, many different examples of courageous women. So to begin the bridge between clarity and courage, right? The second theme that I wanted to highlight here. There's so many different ways that our practices can support us in seeing more clearly what there is to see, and choosing how to act in ways that from that place of seeing things more clearly, seeing how we get stuck, how we can cause harm to ourselves unnecessarily and cause harm to others. This, when I say unnecessarily, I mean, we recognize we all are existentially vulnerable. To live, to be in these bodies is to meet every day with this sort of radical awareness that there's a certain absurdity to being in these bodies, that, on the one hand, it's a beautiful opportunity to make the most of the moments that we have, but for most of us, we have no idea how long we have. And what we do know is that life is can be precious and short, and radically ambivalent, right? The good sometimes do die young. These practices are not a protection against all of the existential vulnerabilities that impact all of us, whatever our gender, whatever our background, however high and mighty we might feel ourselves in some sort of formal hierarchies. And so part of the clarification invitation, I believe, presented by this way is a kind of a waking up to these existential realities. So not just the surplus suffering that I've been pointing to that women face and folks who access the feminine as part of their way that we all may face in a world and in structures that run patriarchy. That's on top of the basic existential vulnerabilities that we all face to age, sickness, and death, right? To the radical impermanence of being alive. And so when we invite, seeing more clearly, part of what we're inviting is all the different ways we're blocking and tackling and avoiding reckoning with the fundamental vulnerabilities that life presents, right? Our lives presents to each of us. So we are vulnerable in these bodies to this threat of extinction. This is, a personal extinction, and let alone the vulnerability we feel at this moment, the climate crisis, et cetera. But the good news, of course, is that once we reckon with that fact of our lives, we can, from the courage that is cultivated by practices that help us sort of see that fact of life and death as a reality that we're up against, and that we, for most of us, will meet when the time comes, whether we have chosen that moment, usually we haven't, or not. The sort of clarifying call to sort of choose a way of living in relationship to that constant vulnerability is, to me, a courage enhancing invitation. And by courage, I mean the willingness to look fear in the eye and keep moving, right? It is not, necessarily being fearless, although perhaps ultimately these practices are inviting us into a kind of fearlessness. And I put it that way because I just want to keep the door open for all of us. We may not be feeling 100% fearless most days. We may not have gotten ourselves so awakened and liberated that we don't ever feel some fear. And nevertheless, courage to me is that willingness to see the fear, to turn toward the fear, to take action anyway, to act notwithstanding our fear. And I smile a little bit when I think about that, because that's a quickening invitation. It's not for the faint of heart or spirit. But when I think about all the folks who inspire me, from my grandmother Nan to Martin Luther King Jr., right, to Gandhi, Baba Ambedkar, there's so many inspirational figures whose lives have manifest taking action in the face of fear. That when I think about what it means to stand in the space of the leadership that we are, the power that we have, cultivating that will to take action, even though we're going to feel fear, even though we're going to feel anxiety. We're not alone in that. We're not going to be the first people. We're not going to be the last to be invited to take the actions that we can, notwithstanding our fear. And as we can cultivate the ability to do that, to access some compassion for ourselves and for each other along the way, well, that's the beauty and the joy of it. Because I, like Alice Walker, a teacher along the way of so many of us, actually, right? Alice joined a number of Black Buddhist teachers at a retreat at Spirit Rock some few years ago. And at that retreat, as she has shared with many of us at other places before, she reminded us that the color purple, the title of the book that she wrote, that many people in some ways have meditated on over the years, and the conventional way of reading the book or going to the play or movie, that book, the title of it was its own teaching, right? It was meant to suggest, don't miss the color purple. Even though we go through difficult times, don't miss the beauty of being alive. So when I speak about cultivating, fearlessness or willingness to act in the face of fear, including unto the terror of death, Okay, that's really what we're up against fundamentally. And what I think is one of the things that creates oppression and all of the dynamics of us versus them and privilege and even war making. Many of us are, again, trying to find different ways to privilege ourselves, to protect ourselves in some false sense against what we see as a threat of vulnerability to our people, to our lives. And that can lead to all kinds of, again, painful, harmful consequences to others. So if we can reckon with these deep fears and discern ways of moving courageously, notwithstanding them, we can access the compassion, the joy of being alive, the conviviality, as the scholar Paul Gilroy has written, right? That being alive together is meant to give us access to. So pausing to invite that compassion as really the sort of secret sauce of how we can move through the world in despite all its pain and challenge, with a commitment to, waking up, clarifying ourselves, taking whatever courageous action we can with accountability, pausing to see how it lands, correcting as we go. This dynamism is facilitated by the Brahma Viharas, right? Metta, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, all leading to this sort of equanimous way, this motion inspired way of making a way out of no way, as Grandma Nan would say, right? That we are called to do in this world. So we move with the pain of our experience. We bring this quality of what I call soulfulness, right, that the Black American experience has delivered for us again and again. But all of our heritages know something about how to move through the pain and find the creative potential of joy. And that's what Alice Walker was talking about when she said, don't miss the color purple. And that's what the soul singers were talking about when they, implore us to find the way of moving and dancing with the difficulties of our time. And so what I want to invite then is to pause together. And before we move to Q&A, to take a few moments to explore a few moments of practice aimed at centering ourselves. I mean, we've had these few minutes together. You've been doing me the honor of listening to my words. And of course, with words, we're only ever just pointing as best we can to something, some room where we can sort of more or less feel a resonating sense of what we mean, right? So with humility, we use these words and we're pointing towards some common shared understanding, but there's always a risk of misunderstanding. And so I appreciate the generosity with which you are listening and sitting with me. So bringing that quality of awakening clarity to bear as we listen as practice, and as we allow this to be another manifestation of what metta can look like, what loving kindness can look like, what compassion can look like. So pausing, bringing the spirit of compassion for ourselves, loving kindness for ourselves, the will to alleviate our own suffering and the suffering of all those first and foremost whose spirits brought them here, gathering together with us in this moment around this campfire. So wherever you happen to be, extending the wish for your well-being right to your heart and opening up to receive your wishes, as I know and believe they are being cultivated and released into this space right here, right now. Because as we pause and we come home to this conscious breath, picking up on in-breath or out-breath, wherever we happen to be, the invitation is to touch into your basic inner goodness, using the metaphor of the sun or the warmth within, certainly that You can take the image of the sun and imagine there's a part of the sun within you, in your heart. And just imagine allowing the radiating warmth and goodness that you are to stand in for this notion of metta, loving kindness, radiating warmth and goodness. So as you breathe in and breathe out, opening up the aperture, noticing where within you right now you can feel your own goodness. Sense into the quality of that for you, the energetic quality of that goodness. Where can you feel it in your body? Perhaps it's in the heart region, or perhaps it's in the region of the mind, the belly. Wherever you happen to be able to gently, lovingly support reconnecting with what is good and well within you. And opening up to see if you might experience the infusion all the way down to your feet as best you can feel, and to the degree that you can feel and sense them in the body that you have in this moment, that you're experiencing in this moment, all the way up to the crown of the head, opening up to experience in whatever ways in the bodies that you are, you can experience your goodness. And if you're willing, see if you can imagine releasing any obstacles to your own basic goodness, that it may flow to the left, to the right, front, back, above, and below, and just radiate out, infusing your own experience, and also just being of service wherever this basic goodness might be needed in this world, whether near or far, in your own home or community, or on the other side of the globe or the planet that we all share in this moment and in every moment of our lives. So as we breathe in and out, sitting as we are in these bodies in contact with the earth, imagine radiating your basic goodness, or at least letting go of any obstacles and just trusting that the energy that you are, the power that you are, may affect and reach out to those in need. Again, near, far, down through the earth to the other side right now, so that wherever we happen to be, we can, in some ways, just rest assured that as we call forth the intention to access clarity, to move through the world as fearlessly as we can, and even when we feel fear, to access courage and act anyway. And then to keep leaning into compassion for the times when we falter, when we feel pain, to access metta as a friend along the way. I thank you. And I invite you, if the eyes have been closed, to open the eyes and to continue the thread of our practice into a Q&A session to support our deepening exploration of these themes together in the remaining time that we have from here.
Thank you so much, Hoshi Magee, for your beautiful words today and your wisdom.
Thank you.
As we move into this question and response, but I wanted to note there were some folks on the Q&A just expressing their deep gratitude to you and for you. And as you were speaking today, I was thinking about the thread between Trudy Goodman's keynote and Lama Tsultrim Alione's and your keynote addressed to us today. And something that you said that really sparked that thread for me was about how we might access this leader within ourselves and you said these words of this mindful remembrance of who we are and who we are in the context of this patriarchy, this and multiple forms of oppression, and really leaning into this cultivation of clarity and courage and compassion. And so I just want to express my own gratitude to you. And I encountered you many years ago in this article that you wrote. We're both academics and professors, and you wrote this really remarkable, radical article on bringing mindfulness into the classroom. And I was blown away by that. And it really impacted how I teach in the classroom. And so I just want you to know that, although we know each other through our various connections in Facebook and Dharma groups, it was actually your article on mindfulness in the law classroom that introduced me to your wisdom. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. We never know when we're, putting something out in the world that may have impact, and it really touches my heart right now to know that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's made me a better educator. So I want to thank you for that. And let me share some of the questions. So the first one we have is from Shloka, who asks and comments, and it's related actually to what I just noted. Thank you so much for your work and teachings. I would love to hear how you would envision an education curriculum that shapes young people to grow into courageous, compassionate leaders, each in their own ways in the world. An education that would guide us to live in harmony on Mother Earth.
I love that question. Woo! And it perfectly picks up on the theme that your beautiful and generous sharing offered, dear Sharon. As a law professor for so many years now, more than 25 years, I've been teaching at the University of San Francisco. And in that way, trying to cultivate, trying to transform legal education from within. But I love this question because it invites a greater imaginative exploration of what it would mean to sort of educate our next generation for cultivating the qualities that we're naming here. I think for me, so much of what seems right now in this moment is about opening the door to the multiplicity of ways that that might be brought to bear on answering our best questions. So, I think the conventional way I was trained, I went to the University of Virginia. I took 3 degrees there. I just refused to leave until I had my undergraduate master's degree in sociology, law school. I've been trained in a lot of different modalities. And I think some of those ways that we've been trained to think of, like, there's one right way to educate, and then we check it off, and then we certify. That's part of our problem, actually. We need an all hands on deck approach to how we do what we're talking about. So I would say to and I hope this doesn't sound like too much of a dodge to the beautiful questioner here, right? Because I hear underlying this beautiful question, a beautiful questioner, that we, really might invite us all into engagement with that question. This is what I mean by saying invite the leader within. Every one of us, no matter what our formal leadership or, however we are in relationship to some formal structure of leadership, we are called, I think, to access our ability to enact our highest and best dreams. So, I have a way that I would imagine doing that. It would involve creating opportunities for practice, for song, for dance, for all kinds of creativity, because I believe that the creative arts are really a direct link to our unique gifts, because I think everybody has original medicine for these times. So, but I would really say having us all, sort of take that question to heart, because we're all teachers. We're all creating some environment for educating wherever we are. I think we have to stop delivering our students, our young, our beautiful beings fully over to somebody else to educate, even, a program that I would create. So it's, yes, create programs where the whole person can be lovingly delivered to their original medicine and affirmed that they have something important to offer year after year and supported and cultivating that and offering it, and then having us be the teachers for that generation, starting today wherever we are. I hope that helps.
Yes, and it reminds me also of what you were speaking of earlier too, about this joy and creativity as a way of cultivating joy. So I feel it even through this Zoom
Yes.
session. And one of the things you mentioned earlier was this concept of the Mahasangha and how we can cultivate this not only through this crazy world of Zoom that we're in, but also a sangha over time and place. You mentioned this lineage of your ancestors. And so I really love the idea of sangha not only being this community in this moment, but who we bring with us and
Yes.
forming us. And so there was a question that I think is related to this. And it's from Susmita. So given the concept of Mahasangha and its deep embrace of us, as I see it, Susmita asks, are there any Dharma support groups for women of color in the US? And what can be done if there is none? So I know that there are many, and I'd love to hear your particular response to this wonderful question.
Yeah. So it is a wonderful question. And the short answer is yes, they do exist. Different types of Dharma groups, support groups exist. And certainly I think we could create a lot more. I think the question again, I think we're called to honor our questions deeply. And so I will, sharing again what comes up for me in the way of pointing in the direction of, many of our sanghas are experimenting with creating affinity group spaces that are really cultivated to open that doorway of a safe enough, brave enough space so that folks feel comfortable coming together and learning and growing. And so there are actually, I've seen many more affinity spaces of color, not so much for women of color, but as things happen, a lot, in my experience, of the affinity spaces, the practice spaces are disproportionately women embraced and engaged. So I'm thinking of some of the practice affinity group spaces that I participate in that are for practitioners of color that actually are really all women. So that just tells us that, again, a lot of our practice communities, as we know, in the West, tend to be disproportionately populated by cisgender or female identified or feminine identified bodies and spirits. And so those places and spaces do exist. Do look for them. Call for them in your communities of practice if you don't quite see one, because there's also this invitation for us to call for what we need and to help co-create what we like to see in the world. That's our leader. That's the call of the leader within us, to not wait for somebody else to create them, but say, okay, I think this might be useful. Let me support that as it might show up in our world. And the only thing I want to name before in case I forget or somehow don't, I'm holding a book called Daughters of the Buddha, Teachings by Ancient Indian Women. It's by my beloved mentor, teacher, friend, Bhikkhu Analayo. He's been one of the friends along the journey, an ally in this work, right? Male identified, a teacher in the Theravadan tradition, scholar of early Buddhism, who wrote this book specifically to provide another a more kind of scholarly early Buddhist support for women and women of color in particular to find our way into these communities and into these roles as teachers and as those who help shepherd communities. I was looking at his book just today in preparation for this and just being heartened by some of the stories he's sharing from the deep tradition of ancient India, the recorded teachings from that that tell us that women of color have been accessing courage in the face of the threat of rape and vulnerability, all the different ways that we move through the world vulnerable. Yes, there's existential threat of death, but we are always threatened by violence in ways that are unique to us as female identified bodies. So, but this book tells us that women in these traditions have borne up against these threats, accessed their courage since ancient times. And I just want to name that because I'll just say, I, like probably many people on this call, have been a victim of all kinds of trauma as well. And we're meant to access our power, notwithstanding the reality that, yes, the threats are real, but we can stand in a deeper sense of what it means to be alive in these bodies, but also to be alive in ways that recognize we come from the great beyond, we will return to it, and we will not let the threat of death and even unjust violence stand in the way of us accessing our power.
Wow. Mic drop. That's beautiful. So beautiful. And what I hear here as well is this, again, this shared theme during this conference on Women of Wisdom of learning how to uproot that imposter syndrome that keeps us from becoming the leaders that we need today. And so I take so much joy and inspiration from what you're saying today. It's really powerful. And I believe we have time for one more question. And this comes from Dan. And the question is, what mindfulness or reflective practices do you find most effective for cultivating courage and resilience on the spot in the face of personal challenges or adversity?
Thank you so much for this question. It may sound just too easy and too simple, but I'm really thinking about the specifics of your question for cultivating resilience and compassion on the spot. To me, it's the practice of simply, I'll use the acronym STOP. So stop, take a conscious breath, ST, right? The acronym. So pause wherever I am. I take a conscious breath. If I can see into nature somehow, and I'm looking left because I have this window that opens up on greenery and the ocean on the other side, the clouds passing. If I can observe something that reminds me that however much I may misperceive things, or the moment may be challenging and making me feel kind of very small and in some ways preoccupied or distracted by some limitations on what it means to be alive. In fact, I am, as I breathe and as I feel the connection with the earth, a manifestation of this miracle of life already in the heavens, right? A manifestation of the stardust. So for me to kind of to stop practice can connect me up with like the cosmos, and from that place anything is possible. So stop, take a conscious breath, and in that moment observe the O of the stop practice, that we are alive, that we're breathing. As long as we're breathing, there is opportunity, potential, and the chance to make a difference. And then so P of the stop acronym then, STOP, having observed that we have power and we can exercise it here, discerning a selection, something to do that can make a bit of a difference for ourselves or others. And then the P of the stop practice, to proceed with presence in the space of that power. That's like a very portable way. And I don't just mean this, like I'm looking out the window, taking a breath, remembering this life is precious and short. How do I want to live this day? How do I want to live this moment? Who do I want to offer love to today? How do I not want to miss the love that's being offered to me today? That's how I move. That's how I try to move. And when it's way too much, I'm lying down on the ground, letting the earth hold me, or I'm dancing, I'm singing, letting, somebody else's music carry me. So there are many, many different ways. And I hope that those few references support us in accessing the ways that are right for you.
I feel you, Hoshi Magee. And I really want to thank you for this incredible, what I feel is a kind of dharma charge. that I think we all need at this time and place. So thank you again. I want to express the deepest gratitude for you and your presence and your wisdom, and to all of you for being here with us today as we close. So the summit is coming to an end, but there's still time to tune in and watch some of the wonderful sessions that are available for free and so important. And there's so many things I will return to today that you have spoken about. So I'm grateful for the recording. And for those of you who are watching, you are invited to purchase the Summit Resource Package that will give you unlimited access to the incredible wisdom brought forth in all of the sessions, and several bonus workshops and additional resources to support you on your path and your practice. So the special event price is still on, and these purchases are invaluable for supporting Lion's Roar's nonprofit mission to sharing the Dharma, including this free summit. So please see the event website for details and click the link pinned in the chat below. And once again, thank you to all of you for being here with us and allowing all of these wonderful women to share their experience and wisdom. Thank you again.
All. Join me somewhere along the way. I hope to see you all again soon. But thank you so much, my dear Sharon, and everyone who's here. We wouldn't be here without you all.
We could see all the wonderful emojis popping up.
And you can find me at rhondavmcgee.com, folks. So let's continue to stay connected.